It is 8:47 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, March 14th, 2026. Somewhere beneath the fluorescent hum of the Pentagon's E-ring, a defense analyst is staring at a Planet Labs satellite image on a classified terminal. The image was taken 3 days ago over a military compound at Dahal, Qatar, what used to be a 40-foot radar dome, a dome that could track a ballistic missile fired from Iran 5,000 kilometers away, is now a blackened crater. 2 impact points, clear structural collapse. The AN/FPS-132 phased array early warning radar, a $1.1 billion system, the single most expensive piece of military equipment destroyed in this entire conflict, is gone. And here is what nobody is telling you. The missile that did this, one of the Emad ballistic missiles launched during Iran's 26th wave of Operation True Promise 4, costs an estimated $250,000 to build, maybe less. That is a 4,300 to 1 cost ratio. For every dollar Iran spent pulling a trigger, the United States lost $4,300 of hardware. That is not a military engagement, that is an economic execution, and as of this morning, the execution is still ongoing. Let's go back to the beginning, not February 28th. That's the day the bombs dropped. Go further, go to Geneva. February 17th, 2026, a lakeside conference room at the Lutfi Qatar Congress Center. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is sitting on one side of a wall. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is sitting on the other side of the same wall. They are not in the same room. They are in separate rooms. Messages are being carried between them by Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi, a man who has been shuttling between 2 nuclear powers for the better part of a year, carrying pieces of paper that could determine the fate of 20 million barrels of oil a day. This is how close the world was to a deal. Signal number 1. On February 27th, the day before the bombs dropped, al-Busaidi publicly declared that a breakthrough had been reached. He told reporters that Iran had agreed, in principle, to never stockpile enriched uranium and to accept full verification by the IAEA. Permanent, irreversible. The most significant concession Tehran had offered since 2015. Al-Busaidi said peace was within reach. Talks were scheduled to resume on March 2nd. There is a third person in that Geneva story, someone who was there, whose presence has not been widely reported, and whose role in what happened next changes everything. We will get to that. But first, you need to understand what Iran did to the United States' missile defenses in the opening 72 hours of this war, because without understanding that, nothing else makes sense. Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. U.S. and Israeli aircraft struck over 1,000 targets inside Iran in the first 48 hours. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed, so were multiple IRGC commanders. The U.S. believed, and this is important, that the decapitation of Iran's leadership would trigger collapse, capitulation, that the regime would fracture, that the Revolutionary Guard would stand down. That is not what happened. What happened instead was a textbook counter-censor campaign. Iran did not try to match the United States bomb for bomb. It went after the eyes. Between February 28th and March 8th, Iranian forces destroyed or seriously damaged at least 4 AN/TPY-2 radar arrays, the X-band surveillance systems that are the literal nerve center of America's THAAD missile defense batteries, at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, at Al Ruwais and Al Dhafra in the UAE, and at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, over 500 miles from Iran's border, where satellite imagery shows 2 13-foot craters in the sand, 5 40-foot radar trailers either destroyed or seriously damaged, and a confirmed Pentagon acknowledgement of the loss. That single radar, the AN/TPY-2 in Jordan, is valued at approximately $300 million. Then came Qatar. The AN/FPS-132 at Al Udeid Air Base is a different category of system entirely. It is not mobile like the THAAD radar. It is a fixed phased array installation capable of tracking incoming ballistic missiles from 5,000 kilometers away. It feeds real-time data simultaneously into THAAD batteries, Patriot missile systems, and allied defense networks across the entire Gulf theater. When it goes dark, every interceptor battery from Bahrain to the Red Sea is partially blinded. It costs $1.1 billion. It was hit by an Iranian ballistic missile on approximately March 3rd, 2026. Planet Labs imagery, analyzed by Sam Lair of the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies, showed clear structural damage to the radar complex and surrounding communications infrastructure. The IRGC claimed a complete kill. The Pentagon declined comment, citing operational security. That phrase, operational security, is Washington's way of confirming something it cannot afford to confirm. Total U.S. equipment losses in the region since the start of the conflict are now estimated at between $1.09 and $2. $4 billion. The U.S. spent $11. $3 billion in the first 6 days of the war alone, according to Pentagon briefings to closed-door congressional sessions. The United States has fired roughly 6,000 strikes across Iran, and Iran, running on far cheaper munitions, Emad ballistic missiles, Fatah hypersonics, Shahed one-way attack drones that cost as little as $50,000 each, has systematically dismantled the sensory architecture that America spent 3 decades building. But here's the catch. Here is where the narrative flips entirely. Because the missile exchange is not the real story. It is the backdrop. The real story is happening in a completely different theater, and it involves a man named Mojtaba Khamenei. Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader for 34 years, was killed in the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, emerged on March 6th as Iran's new supreme leader. And Mojtaba is not his father. Mojtaba is younger, more ideologically hardened, and here is what officials are saying privately, less likely to accept any deal that does not include a full acknowledgement of U.S. aggression. His first public statement contained a specific and deliberate phrase: the lever of blocking the Strait of Hormuz must undoubtedly continue to be used. That was not a negotiating position. That was a declaration. The Strait of Hormuz, 20 miles wide at its narrowest point, 20% of the world's daily oil supply passes through it, approximately 20 million barrels. As of March 2nd, that traffic had effectively fallen to zero. The IRGC officially confirmed the closure. Iran has laid sea mines. Over 150 tankers anchored outside the strait, unwilling to transit. Major shipping companies, Maersk, CMA CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, suspended all operations. Brent crude, which sat at $70 a barrel before February 28th, surged past $100 this week for the first time since 2022, now trading at $101, $13 as of this morning. Gasoline in the United States has crossed $4 per gallon, the highest since late 2023. The S&P 500 has shed 8% since the war began. The Dow fell 674 points in a single session this past Thursday. Here's the domino chain. If the strait stays closed for another 3 weeks, Goldman Sachs projects oil pushing toward $127, the 2022 post-Ukraine peak. If it hits $150, analysts at JP Morgan estimate gas at $5, $50 per gallon for American consumers. If Iran carries out its threat to strike energy infrastructure across Saudi Arabia and the UAE, a threat the IRGC made explicitly on March 8th, oil crosses $200 per barrel. At $200 oil, U.S. inflation returns to 9%. The Fed is forced to choose between hiking into a war economy or watching the dollar erode in real time. Either path is a recession. IRGC spokesman said it plainly: if you can tolerate oil at more than $200 per barrel, continue this game. That is the economic weapon Iran is now holding. Not the Emad missile, not the Shahed drone, the Strait of Hormuz. And this brings us back to Geneva, back to the third person in the room. According to multiple reports confirmed by NBC News, Araghchi was in Geneva on February 26th and 27th, the day before the bombs fell, not just negotiating with Steve Witkoff, but also with Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who had been added to the U.S. delegation. There were 3 parties in that building: Oman as the formal mediator, Witkoff as the lead U.S. envoy, and Kushner as a back-channel closer. Araghchi described the atmosphere as the most productive of all 4 rounds of negotiations. Iran had agreed, through Omani intermediaries, to irreversible enrichment limitations. The IAEA was going to get surprise inspection access. A framework existed. Then Operation Epic Fury launched. The fact is that we don't have any positive experience of negotiating with the United States, Araghchi said in his NBC News interview from Tehran. We negotiated twice last year and this year, and then, in the middle of negotiations, they attacked us. He added, Plan A for a clean, rapid military victory failed, Mr. President. Your Plan B will be even bigger failure. Since February 28th, Araghchi has had 0 direct communication with either Witkoff or Kushner. The back channel is dead. The Omani line is cold, and Iran's new supreme leader is on record demanding not a ceasefire, but a permanent end to the war, with a full U.S. accounting for aggression as a precondition to any talks. But here's the catch, the second one, and this one is the pivot that changes everything. The hardliners inside Iran are not the only ones trying to kill a deal. The hardliners inside Washington are doing the same thing. According to the Wall Street Journal, Senator Lindsey Graham made the most compelling case to Trump for attacking Iran. According to the Washington Post, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman conducted multiple phone calls urging Trump to strike, calls that helped tip the final decision. And according to The Guardian, Trump's decision was made contingent on the outcome of the Geneva meeting. When the Geneva meeting showed Iran making unprecedented concessions, the decision should have been to wait. Someone, and we do not yet know exactly who, pushed for the strikes anyway. Araghchi, in a social media post, called it interference by an America-last cabal. That phrase is opaque. It is coded. But privately, European diplomats and Iranian officials both point to the same force: Netanyahu's government, which had its own timeline, its own red lines, and its own interest in ensuring no nuclear deal was ever finalized. On the U.S. military side, the picture is equally fractured. Defense contractors Lockheed Martin and Raytheon met at the White House this past Friday, as the Pentagon scrambled to address one of the most acute military logistics problems in a generation. The U.S. operates 8 THAAD batteries total, 7 operational before the war. Multiple AN/TPY-2 radars are now damaged or destroyed. Interceptor supplies are being depleted faster than they can be replenished. PSE-3, Patriot missiles, the last line of defense for U.S. forces at bases across the Gulf, are already described as scarce. South Korea's foreign minister confirmed this week that Seoul and Washington are discussing the possible redeployment of U.S. Patriot systems from South Korea to the Middle East. That is how serious the depletion has become. Trump's response was to announce that the largest U.S. defense manufacturing companies had agreed to quadruple production of what he called exquisite-class weaponry. Raytheon's AN/TPY-2 radar, the one Iran has been destroying, has been manufactured in limited numbers since the 1990s. You cannot quadruple production of that radar in 90 days. The supply chain does not exist. The lead time is measured in years, and Iran knows this. Iran's counter-sensor strategy was not improvised. This was planned. Russia, according to Witkoff, has denied sharing military intelligence with Iran. But Iran has been receiving targeting data, satellite coordinates, base layouts, radar positions, from a network of open-source intelligence, commercial satellite imagery, and sources that U.S. officials describe only as various means. The precision of strikes like the Qatar AN/FPS-132 hit speaks for itself. Here is what officials are saying privately. Iran does not need to defeat the United States militarily. It needs to hold the Strait of Hormuz for long enough that the economic pain inside the United States and its allies forces a negotiated off-ramp. Oil at $100 is painful. Oil at $127 is a recession trigger. Oil at $150 is a political crisis for every G7 government simultaneously. Iran is betting that the arithmetic of suffering, $4 gas, canceled flights, disrupted semiconductor supplies, fertilizer shortages that hit American farmers by summer, eventually outweighs the political momentum behind Operation Epic Fury. The U.S. counterbet is that Iran's conventional military cannot survive continued bombardment. U.S. Central Command's Admiral Brad Cooper confirmed this week that Iranian ballistic missile attacks have decreased by 90% and drone attacks by 83% compared to the war's early days. 6,000 U.S. strikes have hit Iranian targets. Iran's air force is largely destroyed. Its command and control networks are fragmenting. But Iran's IRGC still controls the northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz. It still has thousands of anti-ship missiles. It still has sea mines in the water. You can destroy every Iranian warplane, every missile launcher, every radar site, and the IRGC can still sink an oil tanker with a drone that cost $50,000. As of this Saturday morning, 46,000 flights into and out of the Middle East have been canceled since the war began. 13 U.S. service members are dead. At least 144 Iranians have been killed, including, according to Iran's health ministry, at least 168 children in a strike on an elementary school in Emad that the U.S. military has said is under investigation. Araghchi told reporters, "They are killing our people. They are killing girl students. They are attacking hospitals, freshwater desalination, refineries." Urea fertilizer prices, critical for American agriculture, have risen 35% in 2 weeks. Aluminum smelters in Qatar and Bahrain have paused shipments. Helium supplies, vital for semiconductor manufacturing, iPhone production, and medical MRI machines, are disrupted from Gulf processing plants. And here is the final defining number, the number that puts everything in perspective: the $1. $1 billion radar that was destroyed in Qatar by an Emad ballistic missile, estimated to cost $250,000. That is not the most expensive failure in this conflict. It is the most expensive single piece of hardware. But the most expensive failure is the deal that didn't happen, the deal that was, by every credible account, within reach on February 27, 2026. An agreement that would have permanently capped Iran's uranium enrichment, opened its facilities to surprise IAEA inspections, and removed the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran from the strategic calculus of the entire Middle East. That deal is gone. Araghchi has not spoken to Witkoff in 2 weeks. Iran has a new supreme leader who is, by every available signal, harder than his father. And the Strait of Hormuz is closed. So here is where we are. Right now, this morning, Saturday, March 14th, 2026. The United States has a choice not between war and peace in the abstract. That choice was already made on February 28th. The choice in the next 24 to 72 hours is this: does Washington find a credible back channel, a new mediator, a new message, a new offer that gives Arakchi, or more likely Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, enough political cover to open the strait and begin a framework for ending hostilities? Or does the U.S. military attempt to force open the strait by providing naval escorts to tankers? Escorts that the IRGC has explicitly threatened to fire upon, creating the very direct U.S.-Iran naval confrontation that could escalate this conflict from a regional war into something that has no historical precedent? If the strait opens, oil drops to $80 within 48 hours. The S&P recovers. The political pressure on every Gulf ally to sustain U.S. basing rights becomes manageable again. A ceasefire framework becomes possible. A new nuclear agreement, harder than the last, but possible, becomes the path forward. If the strait stays closed, or worse, if a U.S. Navy escort convoy gets hit, oil crosses $120 inside 72 hours. Gas hits $5. Congress, which has not yet authorized this war, erupts. Every G7 economy that depends on Gulf oil calls an emergency session. And the next Iranian missile wave, whatever number it is, whatever combination of Emad, Fada, and K-bar-Shekin warheads it contains, will be aimed not at radar arrays, but at something worse. The next 72 hours. That is the window. That is the whole story. Deal or bombs. Hormuz open or Hormuz closed. A breakthrough or collapse that reshapes the global economic order for a decade. The $1. $1 billion radar is already gone. The question is, what gets destroyed next?